Welcome back to Z-Speed and thanks for tuning back in. Today I'm going to show you how to change out the front brake pads on the second generation Kia Soul, so just stay tuned. So before we get started, we're obviously going to have to elevate the front of the car, place a pair of jack stands underneath to make sure it's nice and stable, and then we can go ahead and remove both of the front rims and get those out of the way so we can have clear access to both of the front calipers. So we're going to begin with the passenger side caliper first, and to make it easy on ourselves, go ahead and get behind the wheel and crank your steering wheel all the way to the right, and that'll give you a lot better access, as you can see right here, to the slide pin bolts and the two bolts that hold the caliper mounting bracket on. So go ahead and do that now. Now, before we remove the caliper, I want to go ahead and compress the piston with this little tool I got from AutoZone. You can see where it fits right in the center of the rotor, and basically you're going to place it into the center of the rotor and then press against the caliper here, and that'll give you some leverage. And what it's doing now is compressing the little piston in, and that'll make it a lot easier to slide this caliper off. Now I'm going to try it again because I want to try to compress this piston as much as possible. I'm kind of hoping that it will completely compress that piston so I don't have to use a C-clamp, but I'm not sure if it'll be able to accomplish that, but I'm going to try. I'm not going to go crazy with it though. I don't want to damage anything, but you can see right here, the slide pin is starting to collapse here, so that's a good sign. So it definitely is compressing the piston. I'm just not sure exactly how much it's going to compress it at this point. Okay, next up we're going to remove the two 14mm bolts here that hold the brake caliper slide pins in, and it's not too hard at all. They break loose pretty easily. There's not a lot of torque here, but what you want to do is once you remove these, you want to inspect those bolts to make sure they're in good shape, that they don't need to be replaced. And mine looked really good. And this is a 2015, so they're not that old. And I did notice just a little bit of oxidation, but nothing major. So now that we've removed those two bolts, this part of the caliper easily slides right out because we used that little tool earlier to compress the piston. And unfortunately, it did not completely compress the piston. As you can see right here, it's still sticking out just a little bit. So we're going to end up needing a C-clamp to completely compress this piston so we can get the new brake pads in. But yeah, I was hoping that thing would completely get compressed, but it didn't happen. So now at this point, we want to suspend this part of the caliper because it's actually got the brake line attached to it, and we definitely don't want to tear this brake line. It's made of rubber. Sometimes they can get a little bit rigid here. Mine looks pretty supple, but I definitely don't want to put any tension on this at all. So what I've done is taken a wire and strung it around the top part of the knuckle up there. I didn't really show that part, but then I wired it around the caliper. And you can see I've suspended the whole caliper so that it doesn't put any tension at all on the brake line itself. Now that I have clear access to my brake line, I'm going to go ahead and spray this down with some 303 Aerospace Protectant. I've talked about this before in other videos, but this stuff is great and it prolongs the life of all rubber and plastic parts. It's a really great product, and I'll try to link it down below. But yeah, I'd highly recommend that you spray a little bit of this on your brake line. Now it's time to remove the brake caliper bracket, and it's just two 17mm bolts, and you break those loose and the whole bracket comes off with the slide pins and the shoes. Now a lot of people make a mistake and they'll stop right here. They'll just pull the old brake shoes out, put some new ones in, maybe they'll throw a little lubricant on the outside, bolt the caliper back on and call it a day. That is not what you want to do here. You want to remove this whole unit, you want to re-grease the slide pins, you want to change out the hardware, and you want to inspect everything. So I would highly recommend you do this procedure here and don't shortcut. Right now I'm going to inspect the bolts and they're looking pretty good. A little bit of rust at the very base, but a nice wire brush will clean all this up and then they'll be ready to reinstall. Now that the caliper bolts are out, we can remove this whole brace, and you can see the brake pads are still intact in the brace, and now we can use that as a guide for our new brake pad replacement. Now's a great time to inspect your rotors. We're looking for any type of gouging or any type of ridges around the ends. I don't see anything like that. These are nice and smooth. There's a little bit of rust from some water, but other than that, these look great. So if your rotors are still good, you can reuse them. If not, you should replace them at this time. Now I purchased the Duralast Gold ceramic brake pad kit because it came with a OEM style brake pads that have little wear indicators down here, just like the original equipment does, and that was very nice. It also has all new hardware and a nice little set of directions. Unfortunately, I'm not going to recommend this product because I had an issue with this hardware here. It just did not fit, and we'll go into that in more detail in a little bit later, but that's what you want to find, is a kit with new hardware and wear indicators just like the original equipment. Now make sure you have a fresh bottle of brake cleaner on hand because we will need to spray down our rotors just in case we get any grease or debris on them before we install our new pads. I like to use this disc quiet on the back side of the brake shoes, and we'll go over that in a little more detail, but if you put some on the back side of these, it'll definitely decrease any kind of squeaking when you're braking. And I like to use this ceramic brake parts lubricant. It's silicone based versus oil based, and it's more compatible with these little rubber boots that go around the slide pins. Keeps them from breaking down as fast if you use a silicone based lubricant. So now that I've got the caliper mounting bracket and I've actually left the brake pads intact, it's very easy to compare the new brake pads with the old ones to make sure I get the proper brake pad in the right area. You can see the little wear indicators on the right hand bottom side. So I found the right pad that fits in there, and now I'm going to check and compare my new pad with the old one on the other side, and I found the right pad for that one. So now I can go ahead and remove these pads, and the reason you don't want to just throw any pad in is because you can see right here the brake pad wear indicators on the wrong side. So if you use that brake pad on this caliper, you'll have the wear indicator in the wrong area. So you want to make sure they match up, and these two do. So we're good to go there. So what I'm going to do now at this point is just remove the old brake pad so I can actually use this as a template to oil the back side of my brand new brake pads. You can see right here where this ring is where the piston makes contact with the back side of this brake shoe, and that's where you could get some squeaking. So I like to use that disc quiet around that area right there. So I'm going to be using that as a little template to oil up my new brake pad there. And the same with the other side. I'm going to remove that now, and I can kind of use that as another little guide to show me where to put the disc brake oil on the back side of this pad as well, so that we don't have any squeaking at all. So you can see this spot right here is what makes contact with the caliper, and if I apply some of that disc brake quiet right there, that should keep everything nice and squeak free. Now it's time to change out the anti-rattle clips, otherwise known as hardware, and I'm just matching my new hardware with my old hardware to make sure I don't put anything in the wrong place here. And this looks good, it matches up perfect. And I'll check the other side as well, and that looks good over here too. Now, I'd highly recommend at this point that you get a kit that has new hardware. You can use the old hardware, I've done it before, but this stuff gets brittle after a while, and you can see it's caked with brake dust, so it can get sticky, and you can wipe them off with a wire brush, but I wouldn't use it more than one time. And at this point now, I always just get kits with new hardware because I like a nice clean brake job, and the new anti-rattle clips will definitely make it easier for you to slide your brake shoes into them. Now you can see I'm using some 303 again as usual, and I'm spraying down those little boots that cover the slide pins here, and I like to use that 303 on everything rubber, so I'm going to get those nice and lubricated. And after they're cleaned up, you want to inspect them for any tears or any damage, and if there is, you'll need to replace those boots. Now I'm going to pull out my slide pin here, and you can see there's very little oil left here, so I'm glad I pulled these out to re-grease them. Now these slide pins are not interchangeable, and you'll see that the other slide pin looks a little bit different. It does not have that little rubber grommet on the end of it, so make sure you do one slide pin at a time and place it back in after it's lubricated. You do not want to mix these slide pins up. Now at this point, I'm going to wipe off the slide pin here, and then I'm going to inspect it for any damage. You want to look to make sure there's no chafing or any type of damage that would cause you to want to replace it. I'm checking the little end of this grommet here, and this looks like it's in good shape here. So no unusual wear or damage here. So I'm just gonna wipe it down, re-lubricate it, then I'll place it back into the rubber boot. Now I'm going to re-oil this slide pin with this ceramic brake parts lubricant that's silicone based here. And the main reason you want to use silicone based lubricant versus oil based lubricant is because it will definitely, oil-based lubricant will break down those rubber boots a lot quicker than a silicone-based lubricant here. So try to get some silicone-based lubricant if you can. You can see I kind of overdid it with the slide pin there. Kind of put quite a bit there. You just want to make sure you get a nice thin, even coat over the entire slide pin, and then you're going to slide it back into the rubber boot. Now you probably want to go ahead and order this stuff online. It's very hard for some reason to find this stuff in the auto parts store. I mean, you can find all kinds of grease in the auto parts store, but I had a hard time finding this silicone based lubricant. So you might want to pick some of that up off of Amazon before you start your brake job at all. Now I got the slide pin back in the boot, and you just want to make sure that you click the boot around the slide pin. Just be very careful of it. It's easy to think you've got it clicked in and it's not quite, and then the slide pin will slide right back out of the boot. But you can see now I've got it clicked in, and now I don't have to worry about any contaminants getting into the slide pin and causing any damage. Now as I slide the other pin out, you can see what I was talking about. There's a big difference here. There's no rubber grommet on the end of this, and as I wipe it off, I can see that there is some scuffing on the pin, but no major damage, and this pin looks like it'll be fine to reuse. Now as you're cleaning this pin, there's a small little channel at the very end. You can see this little groove, and that's where the boot clicks in. So make sure that you get that little channel nice and clean so the boot will have a good clean area to click into. Now this time I'm going to take it a little more easy with the lubricant, and you just want a nice thin coat. This is a little bit better right here, and we can go ahead and slide this in now. And once we get it all the way in, we can go ahead and click it back into the boot, and we're all done. Okay, now that we're done with the slide pins, it's time to put the hardware back into the caliper brace. And I have a little trick for you here. I'm going to use a little bit of this disc brake quiet on the caliper brace itself on some of these surfaces that actually make direct contact to the hardware itself. Now you're just going to put a very light coat, and don't go crazy with it, just a nice thin little coat on these little surfaces that click into the hardware. And what that does is keeps everything nice and quiet when you're braking. I've done it before and it's worked quite well, so give it a try and it might help quiet your brakes down. So now I'm ready to replace the hardware back into the caliper mounting bracket, and this is where I run into my first problem with the job, and that's because the hardware is just a little bit too large to fit into the caliper bracket, and I was totally confused at first. I was like, what's going on with this? Why won't it click in? And it's just a little bit too wide. So unfortunately, the Duralast Gold ceramic brake pad kit does not fit as far as the hardware goes. The pads work great, but the hardware does not fit. So don't get this package. You're going to have to find some other set with hardware that fits. So this is one of those cases where you do have to reuse the hardware. Good news is mine's actually in good shape. It's just a little bit dirty from brake dust, so I clean those up and they fit right back in. But my next job, I'll definitely have to replace this hardware. So don't get the Duralast Gold. So now I've cleaned up the old hardware and slid it into the other side of the caliper mounting bracket, and there was no problems there. And I got another little tip for you. We're going to use some more of this disc brake quiet right here on the edges of the pads, and this is where it actually slides in to the hardware. And by putting a thin coat right here, it'll definitely help also keep any squeaking from happening when you're braking. And I've done this before and it works pretty well. So you don't have to go crazy with the disc brake quiet, just a little bit right around the area where it actually slides into the hardware, and that's all you'll need there. Now that we've got this pad installed into the caliper mounting bracket, I can go ahead and use the old brake pad as a template to apply my disc brake quiet on the back side where the actual piston makes contact with this part of the brake pad. And you can see this will pretty much cover me here, so I don't have to use a lot, but just a nice little thin coat there, and that will definitely cut down on squeaking as well. Now, before we can replace our caliper mounting bracket with our brand new brake pads back in the vehicle, we do have to finish compressing the piston here, and I like to clean this little rubber boot off around the piston because you get a lot of debris from the brake dust, and you really don't want to compress the piston with all that debris back in it. So make sure you clean that off. You know, I like to use that 303 aerospace protectant, and that's what I did. Now it's nice and clean, so we can compress the piston with this C-clamp here. And to make this a little bit easier on yourself, you can go up to the engine bay and remove the cap to the brake reservoir, and that'll allow the air to escape a little easier, and it'll make it a little bit smoother when you're compressing this piston. So once you get that done, we're almost home free. Now you can also take a smaller C-clamp and lay your old brake pad across the top of the piston and then compress it that way. There's more than one way to compress this piston, but whatever way you choose. So now that we've got the piston compressed, it's time to go ahead and place the caliper mounting bracket back on the vehicle. You can see I've got my pads installed and oiled on the outside, so we're ready to go here. Just slide it down over the rotor here and just take your time, make sure that you get your bolt holes all lined up. And at this point, you want to hand thread both of these bolts as far in as possible. It's very important that you do not cross thread these bolts because you do not want them misaligned. This is the brake system. You want this mounted nice and tight with no cross threading. It's very important here. This is very important to the safety of your vehicle here. So now that you've got them in, you can go ahead and tighten them with a ratchet, and then next up will be torquing them down. Now these bolts should be torqued down to between 65 and 79 foot-pounds. I think I'm gonna go to about 74 here. And now that that's complete, we can now slide the caliper back onto the caliper mounting bracket. Now what you may have to do here at this point is compress your slide pins in just a little bit to get this thing to line up correctly. And mine actually slid on quite easily. I didn't really have to compress those. But once you get that lined up, we're going to once again hand thread these bolts back in. You do not want to cross thread these bolts either. So just take your time and thread these bolts in by hand as far as you can go. Now that your bolts are threaded in as far as they can go, we can go ahead and grab a ratchet here and tighten them up just a little bit more. And now we need to torque the bolts down, and the manual says between 16 and 23 foot-pounds is what they would recommend. And once you've completed that step, congratulations, your brake job is now done. So if this video helped you out, don't forget to leave me a big old thumbs up. It really helps the channel out. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Come on, join the Z-Speed team. We'd love to have you on board. Until next time, just keep on repairing.